Hello there, welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast. The slight smile on my face does not represent how I feel. You join myself, Ben Ambrose, and my co-host Adam Harvey to talk about Norwich City and, by the title of the video, the bigger picture. Straight in, Adam. I don't want to beat around the bush. It's looking bleak, mate. How you feeling?
Yeah, I not overly optimistic, to be honest. I sort of looked at this game, I guess, as one where maybe that point against Coventry could look really good with a win. And that performance that we spoke and dissected, on the last podcast, I was sort of prepared to almost push out the window and go, okay, yeah, good point on the road, but they've backed it up with a positive performance and 3 points at home against a team that, had started the season poorly and struggling a little bit. Phil Parkinson under pressure there. Didn't obviously expect Norwich to sort of put in the performance and showcase what we saw on Saturday, which left me with a lot more question marks. And I'm always one that kind of maybe isn't reactive and quite emotional after a game. I always try to kind of remain a little bit level-headed and kind of look at the broader picture and maybe the wider context behind results and don't sort of make judgments too early. However, as much as we're only 6 games into the season, the early signs aren't great. Let's be honest. There's not been much from a positive sense to cling on to in any of the games. There's only been maybe 15, 20-minute spells where within games Norwich have looked quite cohesive and good as a team. Even then, I still think there's been question marks over some of the attacking stuff, which we got into over sort of the last podcast, which we don't need to delve into again. But everything that's been bad so far was fully on display on Saturday, and Norwich got what they deserved. And let's be honest, if it wasn't for Vladan Kovakovic, I think it could have been a cricket score, to be honest, which, for all the reasons I've just outlined there, is majorly concerning heading into another block of 3 really tough games before the next international break.
To circle back to that last pod we mentioned, it was a good one in the sense of it gave us that opportunity to dissect where Norwich were with an international break sort of behind us, and the sample size was enough to actually pick out elements that we could be hopeful about and reasons to be a little bit more cheerful than maybe as negative as we're feeling right now. The response after that performance, when Norwich City were firmly against Coventry under the cosh and got a good point, the response to that is technically, by the scoreline, not as bad as it could have been. But if you watch that game of football and you're a Norwich City fan, you're probably feeling as bad as you would if we'd lost 5-0, because that performance was absolutely diabolical. And if you want a good laugh, continue to watch, but also go back and watch the match review that I made after, because the head was completely gone. And I like to think, Adam, that I'm like yourself in the sense of I will always look at the context and I'll try and be calm. And in the moment, emotions always run high, don't they? But after I try and, I'm sure my friends will say that it's quite annoying at times. I'll try and be reasonable and look at the wider picture and sort of drink in the wider context. But something just didn't feel right. Something really felt off after that. And the only sympathy that I will give on this podcast today will be right now, in that the feelings I have en masse from Norwich City post Daniel Farker. Everything is, and we've said it under Thorpe, we've said it under Wagner, we've said it under Smith. Everything that has happened still affects the way I feel. Liam Manning can't control that. Ben Knapper, to a degree, up until Thorpe, can't really control that. So they have a little bit of sympathy from me there. But you cannot ignore the bigger picture. You cannot ignore that, again, at Norwich City, another project is derailing. We will continue to talk about the bigger picture, but let's focus on the Wrexham game specifically. Man, it was painful. Man, it was painful. If you look at the stats, it doesn't it didn't really it doesn't come across as a game where there was much between the teams. Norwich had more possession. Okay, they were the home team. They passed the ball around a little bit more. Wrexham created 11 shots. We had 14 shots on target. Wrexham had more, 8. We had 5. And it's just such living proof that you cannot judge a game of football based off stats. And this is actually a point I made last week in terms of Wrexham's performances and how actually we looked at Saturday as an opportunity to take advantage of a team. But if you looked at the stats, they weren't playing too bad beyond the expected goals against, I know. But that game, Adam, let's start with the first half where things didn't look quite as bleak as they obviously did in the second half. How do you assess that? Because we saw the introduction of Jurasek, which for me felt like a pretty big step because he was a name we were calling for. How do you assess that first half? And when Norwich go in 1-0 up at half time, what sort of were your emotions?
Yeah, probably one that they were a little bit lucky, I guess, to be going in 1-0 up. You look at, Kiefer Moore. I've never seen a big man like that have so many runs in behind as what he got from a Norwich defence that were just being exploited all afternoon by a Wrexham team that, historically and notoriously aren't really one for playing in behind. They're more of a, sort of physical team that I think you look at sort of the profiles of some of their players and you would expect them to kind of be trying to, I guess, use the flanks and get balls into the box in terms of crosses rather than sort of putting balls in behind. But the exploitation they were having in that area was a major concern going forwards. A lot of that sort of attacking fluidity that has been lacking over the course of this season. And, I know we've spoken about it. Josh Sargent's kind of been the sort of, I suppose the main front line option to spark a little bit of creativity and find Norwich those moments within games to win them games and sort of dig them out of difficult positions. And even he wasn't really present in that game. They weren't sort of utilising those wide areas as well as they could have done with the likes of Jurasek and Diallo on the pitch with their sort of pace, I guess. You'd hope that they could have utilised that a lot better. The crossing again, you look at some of those balls that were put in from Diallo. They sailed straight behind for a goal kick. And I think just Norwich just didn't look very well coached again. A lot of the problems that, we've spoke about already over the sort of first two podcasts and everyone really, across any platform, whether that be a podcast format or social media that have viewed sort of games, I guess, within close quarters would feel the same way, that they just don't look like a cohesive unit at the moment in a defensive sense, really, or an attacking sense. And as much as I felt they'd made a few strides in that defensive area, maybe comparatively to last season, there was still a lot of concerns and alarm bells ringing in my head. And Saturday definitely didn't help sort of shut those down and that attacking problems. I think, you can question the selection that Liam Manning made again. Was it sending a positive signal to some of those options that came off the bench again that actually influenced the game? We could speak about the second half in a moment, but when you see Antti Sienats in the lineup again, who for 5 games prior to that hasn't really offered anything, none of that sort of creative spark or sort of utilising the space that he's had at any point to then kind of be rewarded with another start. I know Norwich are lacking a little bit in options, with the injuries to certain individuals, but similar problems. However, I think different maybe to the first 2 home games where I felt the first sort of 20, 30 minutes, Norwich actually came out of the blocks quite quick on the front foot. They didn't really sort of do that on Saturday. If anything, they gave Wrexham a little bit too much respect. I think sort of sat in a little bit and, apart from that little bit of quality from Jack Stacey with the finish, there wasn't too much between the sides. And on another day, I think Wrexham go in 1 or 2 ahead.
They should have. Absolutely, I agree. They should have. And there was the Kiefer Moore chance that was sort of smothered by Big Vlad, wasn't there? Where he was like a fraction offside. But the real question isn't why isn't the lino seeing it? It's Harry Darling, mate. Why is there that massive gap between you and Medic where Kiefer Moore, someone who is not the quickest by any means at all, how is he allowed to just gallop forward? And he should score. And there was the free kick save as well, which is a bit of a camera save, but it's so bizarre to me the nature of that first half, as you correctly say, that the thing Manning would say was, oh, well, you look at the first 20, 30 minutes of Borough and Millwall and, the trend, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff compared to what should be weaker opposition. They come out and they look scared. They look, as you say, they don't look coached. They look completely void of ideas. And when you're trying to get the home crowd on side, no one's showing any personality or flair. And I mean, Jurasek got off to a pretty terrible start. I think he misplaced 3 or 4 passes very quickly, but then started to make those sort of intricate touches and those little passes. And again, he got the assist, didn't he? But it really does worry me, and I'm left in a position of just not knowing what to expect at all. We speak about the bigger picture. We speak, we're going to look ahead to Stoke, aren't we? Big picture or not, I don't know what to expect. I don't know what I'm looking for from a Norwich City team at the moment. They don't know what they're looking for, and I'm having to hang on a point of I want to make about the second half, which I'll get to in a second, in terms of them being as clueless as us watching. But it really is just, I don't know. It really stinks, and the lineup was eyebrow raising in the sense of Cordoba had to play in left back, which immediately is just like, oh god, here we go, and that played out exactly as you imagined it would. Cianats is absolutely stinking the gaff out at the moment, and yeah, all right, we'll give it the whole. He's a young man. He's still whatever. I don't care. He's an £8 million player, and he's absolutely stinking the place up, and he's a very lucky boy to still be in that starting 11. I don't think there's much else to really say about that first half. When that goal goes in, it's a nice finish from Stacey. Um, and he again is one of those players that I wish everyone had his mindset of just going for it and actually. I hate saying it, but trying. He's the only one who looks like he's really bothered about giving it a go. Look at me whipping out the trying and giving it a go. It's mental that 6 games in or 7 games in, whatever we are now, we're having to sort of worry that players aren't looking like they're bothered. Um, Stacey's finish was nice. Bizarrely, when watching the highlights, I don't know if you noticed this. I've got it on my notes here, so I'm hoping you saw. When you watch the highlights, they cut out the pass from Jurasek, which I find utterly bizarre because it was a really nice pass, which leads me to one thing, to believe one thing, which is like, was it offside? Like, am I insane for thinking that?
No, I don't think so. So I sort of decided to delve into the highlights on Sunday morning, which was probably the biggest mistake I've made because I just about sort of began to gather my thoughts, I suppose, and sort of be a little bit less emotional because as you know, for the first time really in 4 years, I've kind of viewed the game now within a sort of fan's view again, after sort of doing it professionally for 4 years, and being within a crowd setting again is different, and you kind of get that emotions a lot more, and it comes through because you know the position of the press box. Okay, you've got fans in front of you, but maybe they're a little bit different to those that sort of sit behind the goals, or you know, it's kind of where the atmosphere's at, I guess, and I could really sense that frustration in the first half, you know, kind of the lack of urgency, I guess, from those at the back to build up quickly. And it just allowed Wrexham to kind of sit in and sort of pick the ball off. And, you know, with some of the sloppy passing again, I mean, the pass accuracy stats speak for themselves. Just a lack of creativity. And I know Connor, our good friend Connor, made this point on the Pinkham podcast about kind of maybe lacking sort of creativity, but Nunez has been sort of part of almost Norwich's best, you know, couple of spells, I guess, within games, and maybe missing that sort of profile in the midfield. I know that's not something that Manning historically has played with previously at other clubs, but they just look completely clueless when it comes to building up. You know, they from the back, they're slow. The bits in the middle, you know, okay, they might keep hold of the ball, but then that kind of threading it, I guess, into that sort of attacking front sort of trio is just completely lacking. And then Sargent's just anonymous at this point, apart from if he actually, you know, picks up the ball on the halfway line and does something for himself. So, yeah, a lot of concerns coming out of that first half, and it just didn't improve over the course of the second half. If anything, you know, that first 13 minutes of the second half was quite something.
Yeah, Jesus. The only other thing before I have a little cry about the second half was that I didn't mention Pelle Matson first start for Norwich City. I've seen some compliments on Twitter. Not going to argue against them. I think there's evidence there that he can be a tidy player. There's a wider point of he's not a midfield two player. Definitely not a midfield two player. I think he's almost got a touch of the Jacob Wright syndrome in that he needs that idyllic midfield three where someone's a bit more creative and someone around him runs. I think he seems a bit more athletic than Jacob Wright. But yeah, just to mention that, you know, him starting and what made me think of that was you mentioning Nunez and that Norwich don't actually have that recognisable number 10, do they, at the moment? And if if Anti Cianats is that, then woof, we're in for a long season. No offense, Anti. The second half, Adam, I just want to start by saying I took my brother-in-law to the football, and he's a big Norwich City fan, doesn't get the opportunity to go to many games, and he was absolutely buzzing. Oh, he was really excited to be there. I was excited to have him there. And then we were having our Willie's halftime pie, absolutely brilliant. Had the beef mince and cheese one, lovely, would recommend. And we're sat eating it, right? And the second half starts within a minute, right in front of us. The Norwich City defence decides it just doesn't want to defend, and Josh Windass is there, and it's a tidy finish. And for some reason, Manning had switched to the back three, and oh my god, it's just it makes my blood boil watching that. And I've got you keep seeing me looking over here. We're looking at the same thing, aren't we? That screenshot that has been passed around Twitter of Norwich's back three, so Cordoba, Darling, and Medic, just a good 5 yards behind Windass, whose arms outstretched. He's in dreamland. He's thinking, "Oh my god, how and why have I got all of this space?" And he does exactly what you'd expect a player of his quality to do in the Championship, and he puts Norwich to the sword. A minute in, that is probably. Do you not think that that is how you would describe how you do not want to start the second half? What is Liam Manning saying at half time for that to happen?
Yeah, I'm completely baffled by it. It's sort of I had an interesting vantage point of being in the Upper Regency on Saturday, and you kind of saw the break building, and you look at kind of I know those sort of cries, but he must be offside. There's no way he's got that free in the box with that much room and that space. A player of his quality, as you say, who has notoriously done well at scoring goals at this level, particularly against Norwich. In sort of previous clubs he's been at as well. To allow him all of that space and that freeze frame just speaks volumes. I just can't really fathom how that has happened, particularly where you look at a second half. You're probably going in at half time being like, okay, we've not played well there, lads, but keep it tight initially. We don't want to be conceding an early goal here and give kind of Wrexham that almost energy, I guess, and that sort of front-footed nature that they would notoriously get from scoring a goal, and they just built off the confidence of that goal, and probably if they'd have done that in the first half, I'd have dreaded what the second half would have looked like even more so, because yeah, that just is not what you want in a home game as well against a team that has struggled already so far this season. To give them that opportunity so early in the second half to equalise, yeah, I just can't quite comprehend that that's a Championship defence that's allowed that to happen.
There's two elements, isn't there, to conceding that goal. You've got the system that was deployed, and you've got the. I want to relate it to the comments that Liam Manning made after the game about this team does not reflect him. And I completely agree. A manager's team should reflect them. And what were the words he used? Like hard work, integrity, desire, all of that sort of classic football spiel. And let's look at it from both sides. Tactically, once again, we see the back three just exploited with absolute ease. I only have to think back as far as Middlesbrough at home to when Topic gave the ball away, and I appreciate it's an individual error, and we made almost those caveats, didn't we? That okay, if we can iron out the individual errors, we won't be in a position where we get exploited. This was whoever was in the middle of the park for Wrexham. This was them getting the ball, going, oh, hang on a minute, just like the 2, 3 other goals we've conceded with that system. He's picked a pass, and all of a sudden, yet again, a Championship striker finds themselves behind Norwich's back three and just scoring a tap in. It it's regressive and it's really concerning. And I don't think I want to be as extreme as if I see this system again, I'm just going to give up all hope. But surely there has to be something going on in Liam Manning's head that goes, actually, maybe this isn't going to work. Because clearly, from the prior experience, Norwich City are not learning their lessons. I really should have learned who was in midfield. Whenever they pick up that ball and spray that pass, Cordoba, Darling, and Medic should start that run back immediately. But for some reason, you can almost see Darling sort of turning like that and being like, "Oh God!" And for some reason, it takes all three of them like a good what felt like half an hour to think, right, I'm going to start sprinting here. And by that point, Josh Windass is sliding on his knees in front of me whilst I'm eating my pie. Um, I don't. This is where it's only fair to criticise Liam Manning in the sense of, look, learn your lesson. If if Stoke comes around and we see that goal conceded again, I don't know how much more patience can be afforded. It almost feels like, and we were promised, weren't we, this idea of Norwich being flexible. We were promised that. It almost feels as if he's tried to overplay that hand in the second half. And it's almost like he's trying to prove a point that he can read a game of football. And at half time, he's gone, oh, I'm going to make this tweak because, it feels like that's the way the game's going. I mean, that's just not. It really is just not. And I don't know how he thought that would solve because the problem we had in the first half wasn't it, was we almost looked stifled and we lacked creativity. Why on earth he thought the back three would fix that and taking Diallo, who was getting must have been 3 or 4 good opportunities. I know his crossing was terrible, but he was getting the ball, he was getting those opportunities, and he goes, "No, I'm just going to rip him away from that, stick him in left wing back, and set my team up to be in a position where this happens again." Man, it makes me angry. Um, that second half, though, again, the second goal, the heads go down, don't they? And the third goal as well. Norwich just, and this goes back to the point of it doesn't reflect Manning and what he said, and integrity and desire and all of that. What do you make of the heads just dropping? Because I mean, you can sniff it from a mile off at Carrow Road. The teams that we have loved before, the heads stay up, and even if they lose the game, you can feel like a certain level of effort was given. How do you feel as a supporter now, Adam? Just watching the heads go down, and just it almost feels like they just give up.
It's what sort of concerned me, I think, most was, I know during the week the club sort of put a social clip out of Manning almost speaking about that, mentality within games where don't, if you go 1-0 behind, don't let the heads drop. You keep the heads up, keep playing the way that we've set up to play and the way we've almost trained throughout the week and sort of, giving you all the instructions for how we want to see the game. Execute that plan and hopefully, obviously, your quality will shine through and you'll win the game. And almost the opposite of that, where if you go 1-0 up, don't kind of believe that the game's there and finished. You've got to keep going and sort of play the same way and hopefully try and kill the game off, I guess, with another goal. And to then see that display on Saturday, which to me is again that mental fragility that just seems to have been a common theme now of every Norwich team pretty much for the last 4 or 5 years, as this kind of regression, I guess, of our football club from a team that was yo-yoing, which I know that came with criticism, but to now a team where they've been pretty consistently a mid-table championship team over the course of the last 3 seasons, give or take the season that Wagner managed to get them in the top 6. But, I think there was a lot of mitigation and sort of question marks around that. And I think that was almost more of a siege mentality of Wagner and that group trying to almost hit back, I guess, at some of the haters that sort of criticised him for a lot. Just to see that same problem with a different group of players, and I know that we've tried to address that in recent times by going down the route of, more older, experienced pros that have lived and breathed the championship. But I think they probably went too top heavy one way. Now they've almost sort of got rid of a lot of that core of more experienced players and gone for more unknown quantities from overseas or sort of younger players from England. And I still think they maybe lack that leadership, particularly, I guess, with no likes of Kenny McLean on the pitch or Shane Duffy. As much as, you can criticise him as an individual or his ability as a footballer, he does have that experience in those difficult moments to probably guide some of these younger players. And I looked around that group on Saturday, and apart from maybe Josh Sargent leading from the front, you sort of think, okay, who's here maybe to kind of grab the ball by the horns and sort of pull these younger lads over the line and kind of maybe get this back in a positive direction. And there just isn't really. And I think that's all too familiar, unfortunately, over the course of the last few years. And I don't really know quite how they address that, because clearly that's a major issue.
I'm really glad you mentioned the clip, because I know exactly the one you're talking about, where Manning, in a more sort of expletive sense, says, "Don't poop your pants." And when I watched that, I sort of felt like, yeah, do you know, I actually agree with that. I completely agree. It's what Norwich have done, and it's nice to almost see that being addressed. And I want to caveat this with, I love the content Norwich put out. I think it's top draw, but it's almost been counterproductive, because it now feels like, oh, is that all he's saying? Is he maybe not tactically explaining how not to poop your pants? That is the way it feels. That to him, my brain has read that situation as that's all he's saying about if we go a goal down, because goodness me, that's what it looks like. The second and third goal, I don't think we particularly need to analyse, because the characteristics of those goals and the way Norwich was set up, very much just a copy and paste job. I want to try and take a positive. You can go first. What do you take from that as an attempt to be positive? Because it's good exercise to try and do so, I guess.
Yeah, I think the positives are kind of lacking. I mean, you look at, I guess for me, probably the only thing I can say is that I think the substitutions, albeit in sort of the game state that it was in, I think those players coming on almost didn't really have any pressure on them to perform. But I think a lot of them, certainly Makama getting off the mark with a goal, but also just his general performances, I think off the bench in recent games have kind of sparked something and offered them slightly different, something different that we did speak about a bit last week. And I think they've almost, looking at those individuals now, I'm thinking these next few games, he's got to almost irrespective of your thoughts and feelings maybe on formations, I think he's got to look at the individuals that are currently performing when they've been given opportunities. And yeah, I think he's one. Liam Gibbs, I think as well. We can sort of single him out, I suppose, for a bit of credit as well for his performance when he came on. I thought he was again positive and trying to drive Norwich forward into positions where they weren't really over the course of the whole sort of 18, 90 minutes beforehand. So yeah, I just think the alarm bells for me are so ringing loudly in my head that the positives have almost been drowned out by all the negatives. But yeah, it's obviously a big week now leading into this game. I think the fact that there's no midweek is probably in some ways helpful to almost try and analyze what went so badly wrong in that game on Saturday. Because had it have been a midweek game, there'd have been so much pressure straight away to perform. Where there's still going to be major pressure on Saturday when they travel to Stoke against a team that, as we'll speak about, have had a pretty good start to the campaign and always notoriously a difficult place to go. But yeah, it's a big week, I think, and probably a big 3 games now heading into the next international break, because my fear, is that if they don't start to showcase some performances and the positive signs maybe start to outweigh some of the negatives, then unfortunately a lot of this fan frustration and anger, I guess, that's starting to build now across social media, and you can feel it within the fan base, certainly, post-game, the reaction that it got, and rightfully so, by the way, will only grow louder. And then I fear for maybe not just Liam Manning and the project, but probably the wider picture as well, and maybe some of those above him, which isn't really a conversation we want to be having, 6 games into a sort of a new era after what happened last season.
It's all about perspective, isn't it? I want to make 2 points before we very swiftly move on to what will be the bigger picture that we promised we'd speak about. I'm really pleased McCarmer scored. And then my caveat is my second point, which is he only scored because the goalie spilled a long shot from Liam Gibbs. You can't even, you can be pleased for the lad individually, and we've praised the impact he's had on games, and I'm sure he'll continue to have a positive impact. But the fact is, if you watch those Norwich highlights, beyond the 2 goals, you've got Jurasek missing a one-on-one, and I think that is a damning indictment of Norwich's performance levels against Wrexham. I mentioned the 14 shots compared to Wrexham's 11, didn't I? None of those worth being put on a little highlights reel, and I really don't think that's reading too much into it. That is it. It frustrates. It frustrates me to no end. It is. It's just not fun. It really is not fun to watch. But moving on to the bigger picture, whilst looking at my notes here, I actually realised that I didn't summarise what we're going to talk about at all. So I'm looking at last week's notes right now. I don't know if you realise that, but you mentioned the start of another project, and on the thumbnail of this video, it's going to be a picture of Ben Knapper. We can talk about, right, we've got a new manager, we've got some new players, it's another project. I don't really want to look at it like that, because I want to scrutinise Ben Knapper as much as Liam Manning, because he is the man directing our club, the sporting director. This man is he's at a very high level, and he is a very important figurehead. And actually, this is still the same project as it was when he took over. This is his project. The manager might have changed, but actually that is probably more of an indictment on his performance and how he's doing in his role. And I don't want to lay into him too much, because as is the nature of football, you've always got that time, haven't you, to adjust and to adapt and to almost make that ground back up. But I'm going to throw this to you in a very difficult question at the moment. The way I see it is, this is now his second manager, and I appreciate he doesn't actually have the personality of what Stuart Webber did on camera, of being really candid and I'm going to promise this, this, and this. But he has promised a certain type of football, not a specific style, but he wanted, what was it, dominant, high pressing, attacking football, which is the dead opposite of what we're seeing at the moment. But personnel wise, that shouldn't change. And actually, he's got another manager in, signed a bunch more players who don't feel suited to the manager. And I feel like enough time has passed to now be a little bit concerned about him. and whether he's out of his depth for this role. It's very easy for us as football fans to criticise the 11 men who step out onto that pitch and the bloke who stands in the technical area pointing and telling them what to do, or in Liam Manning's case, not telling them what to do. I'm really worried about where we are as a club, because we are and have been, and I will keep making the point, we have been promised certain things. We've been promised, look, we're a team that want to be in the top six. We want to be contending for promotion. And the evidence that we've seen over this period for Ben Knapper is that there's no direction to the project. I think Thorpe was quite candid, and Glenn Ridson was as well, quite candid after they were sacked about how the parameters changed and how the goalposts were actually picked up and moved. And those comments are key to the way I feel. I just there's no real direction, and I mean that to the very top of the club. And what makes me extremely nervous is that we have an ownership group that haven't been here very long. With Delia and Michael, whilst you don't have the financial firepower / the know-how that maybe the current American group have, they had, as football fans, as people who know the game. I mean, Mark Atanasio has been quite upfront, hasn't he, about not actually at first understanding football as a game. We had owners that could look at it and assess it, and there was that level of trust, wasn't there? If we go right to the very top, as I am right now, we've got owners who are still learning about the game. We've got a sporting director who's incredibly new to the role and is seemingly just pivoting between different ideas of coaches and styles and players, and then back down to the manager who is just doing a terrible job on the pitch. I am really worried about the roots at Norwich City at the moment. I don't know what there is to be particularly positive about, and forgive this rant, but how do you assess it? Because we've signed quality players, we've praised the amount that Norwich have spent, and you can talk about net figures, you can talk about recouping fees. We've spent a lot of money. What is it? The third highest in the division, Wrexham and Ipswich above. And I mean, I appreciate we've recouped that fee, but we've spent a lot of money. We've been promised this, that, and the other. Adam, tell me, like, what's going on? Like, how? Because when results aren't going the way they should be, as they really, really aren't, and performances are nothing to cling on to, you have to look sort of further up the ladder, don't you? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, it's felt like a club that's almost been confused for, well, 4 or 5 years now, almost since the day they got rid of Daniel Farker, and Stuart Webber almost abandoned everything that he was and sort of his vision of football to chase short-term performance and short-term goals and targets. And we all know how the Dean Smith project panned out, and that clearly didn't work. Webber then almost was accused of kind of selecting and opting for a mate over maybe what could have been pivoting back to what should have been, I guess, the sort of style and the system and a sort of head coach that Norwich fans like to almost have a relationship with and kind of want to associate with, and that sort of attacking football that we've always notoriously been blessed with watching. Then obviously I think when he departs, and we obviously speak about Ben Knapper's arrival, and quite clearly from day one he didn't view David Wagner in the same light as what he wanted to see from a Norwich City manager, and Norwich City in terms of the way they played and sort of the group of players they had and the underperformance we maybe saw in that season. And I can obviously understand what the reasoning why he decided to prolong that, because clearly behind the scenes for a long time they had been planning Johannes Torp's arrival, and maybe the timings and kind of the plates didn't quite align to bring him in any earlier, and that's completely understandable. And I think you can kind of speak maybe about that. I spoke about it a little while ago there about sort of the siege mentality, I guess, that David Wagner instilled within that group to almost achieve something, to kind of prove a point. And Johannes Torp's arrival, it was very clear that was Ben Knapper's man, and kind of the man he saw to lead this group and this club forward to what he wanted to see from a football team. Having worked at Arsenal, and you kind of look at the way that they play, I know this is a completely different level, and Norwich, are never going to be playing the sort of football that Arsenal can, because they can't attract obviously the sort of said players that a big club like Arsenal can. But you can still have that sort of attractive style of play, and to a lesser extent, I guess, within a championship parameter where different teams are playing different styles. And I think there's almost a route to success with all of them if you can kind of find the right manager and their coaching is good. As much as Yanis Torp got fair criticism, and clearly there was progress at the start of the season. I've seen clips on social media this week of kind of some of the performances early on last season and some of that free flow and attacking football we saw. And as much as there was question marks maybe around the defensive side of it, I think there was maybe some small tweaks that needed to be made, and that could have potentially been a positive route. Clearly, towards the end of last season, it wasn't working, and I can understand the reasoning for why Ben Knapper decided to, this is maybe not going how I wanted it to go, and maybe it's time to kind of rip that up and try something different. However, when you've almost been out there publicly speaking about the way you want to see a football team play, to then bring in a coach who is a lot more pragmatic and doesn't maybe quite align with how you've outlined, you sort of want, I guess, from a head coach, that in my own mind was a bit like, okay, this looks a little bit muddled and a little bit confused. Is this almost short-termism again, trying to get to the Premier League and hoping that something will, almost throwing things at the wall, I guess, and hoping something will stick? I know Dean Smith, used to kind of use the sticking plaster anecdote around kind of just getting results, and maybe that kind of masks a lot of the problems, I guess, within a football club. But I think there has got to be a few question marks around Ben Knapper if this continues the way it is at the moment, because he's ultimately gone out there and appointed Liam Manning, and I just don't believe the Atanasios, for the goals they have and the money they've invested in this football club and where they see the future of this football club and where they want it to go. I struggle to see how, if Ben Knapper decides to sort of pull the trigger at some point on Liam Manning and almost admit a second failure, how he can almost go and appoint somebody else and have a third go. Because, as much as, Stuart Webber got criticism at different points, and I don't think it's fair to almost judge a sporting director until at least, maybe 18 months in, because clearly transfer windows are required to do surgery to a team, and you need time for things to gel and sort of, as much as transition seasons aren't well liked within football, I think they have got to almost be there to kind of allow a club to progress in some ways and maybe reach the way or guess where they want to go in the long term. However, Norwich have had that now for kind of 3 or 4 years. And as much as I know Ben Knapper wasn't here for those couple of seasons prior to, the last couple, he has now been in the building for over 18 months. And ultimately, where we are at the moment is no sort of significant progress, if any progress. If anything, it's regressing the other way, having spent all the money you outlined. And they have still got the best striker in the Championship. They've recruited Harry Darling, who I think is one of the better centre-backs in the Championship. Vladan Kovacevic, I think he deserves credit for that piece of recruitment. But you look at the general kind of recruitment, I know it's early days for some of these lads, and even some of the cohort from last year, they're young lads, and they maybe need a little bit of time to develop. Josh Sargent wasn't the finished product after the first season, no more than he was at 18 months in. However, I think for the money you've outlaid, you would expect results at this point. Even if it isn't all clicking 100%, there should be positive signs, and there isn't enough for me for the money they've outlaid and the change of manager and change of kind of styles of play again. It all just feels very muddled, very confused, and almost fingers crossed kind of mode, that hoping that things will change, and they're not. So yeah, I think it's a really, I said it already a couple of times, I think it's a really big period now. They've got to get results. But I also think the performances have got to be far better. As much as, they can get a point at Coventry, if they play that way and get wins, I still don't think that'll be enough, because David Wagner tried that, he got results, and the fans still didn't want it. So yeah, it's, I don't really know where they go from here. It's a really muddled position, to be quite honest.
Well, what this whole thing relies on is a U-turn in form, because I completely agree with you with everything being very muddled. Ben Knapper has overseen the signing of some quality players, and one thing we'll always say about Stuart Webber, and one thing we'll remember him fondly for, is the quality of player he signed for Daniel Farke and the project that initially existed. But this summer window is a great example, and to be honest with you, I think I was looking at the headlines that we saw before Manning was appointed, because it was Manning, Linders, and O'Neill, wasn't it? They were the three. That feels like foreshadowing for the season to come, and actually the way the project was going, because at the time, looking at those three names, it was like, oh, but obviously it was Liam Manning nailed on to get the job for all the reasons we've spoken about before. But looking at that list now, you're like, this is a guy who promised us XYZ football, dominant, high press, intense, attacking football. And in what is now year 2 of the project, I'm looking at these names as these were the options for manager. And to go back to what I was saying, the issue isn't can Ben Knapper and his team spot quality. I mean, they can spot quality until the cows come home. You've got to know how to assemble a team for not just a project, but for the manager you're hiring. And Stuart Webber did a great job in setting out the standards for how we should look at a head coach, because the head coach should be able to leave and the club not completely change direction unless it's a change of direction that everyone recognizes needs to happen. All right, let's just caveat it with that. But I look at, and this is what really makes me worry about Ben Knapper, is I look at the 11 signings and they almost feel like they were planned for a year 2 Thorup. You always hear that, oh, we've been watching him for 18 months, we've been watching him for 6 months. Okay, cool. I don't not believe you. I very much imagine that is the case. But, and just off the top of my head, Vladan Kovacevic is very much a Thorup goalkeeper, someone who's a bit risky on the ball and a big personality. And again, it's that element of risk with passing. Someone like Medic, a ball player, someone who looks to switch the play and play that Hollywood pass. And in the middle, again, he's signed loads of central midfielders, not a recognised number 10, but it's a manager who doesn't want to play a midfield three. You've got Gibbs, Wright, Matson, Topic. Is that your main lot that I'm thinking of for
McLean, yeah, Kenny McLean.
McLean? Yeah, you've got all those midfielders, yet you don't want to play a midfield three. I mean, I just it really it baffles me. It makes me really question what's the direction, where are we heading, and what does Ben Knapper do here? Does he sack Manning and does he go for another Thorup? In terms of the proven style of football, not just the results. One of the ironic things about Liam Manning is actually, and someone pointed this out to me just after he was appointed, and it's really come to fruition, of his Bristol City team last year were one of the teams who gave the ball away most in the league. Yet we were sold this idea of they were more pragmatic, they were a lot more resolute, they were solid, I guess is the right word. Um, Ben Knapper's got some serious talking to do. He's not going to do the talking because realistically, a sporting director doesn't speak that much. Stuart Webber, again, probably raised a little too high the expectations of Norwich fans for what they should expect to hear compared to what they should expect to see. Again, it highlights the fantastic job he did and the fact that Norwich actually, and Delia Smith, to praise her, be honest with you, I didn't I didn't expect to be saying praising Delia Smith today. But the fact that they nailed it first time with Webber and then with Farker, not so much the signings, more so in the second season, but it really emphasises that point. And Norwich are at a point where, hang on a minute, that coaching wise, they've not nailed it. Why have they not nailed it? Well, because with Ben Knapper, they've not nailed it. The only thing that is now certain is that the American ownership group are here to stay. They're in too deep now. Some serious decisions and some serious pathways need to be mapped and some decisions need to be made. I'm not saying right now they should call Ben Knapper and sack him, but internally there's got to be a review of, guys, what the hell are we doing here? And I would love to know what's going on in Ben Knapper's mind in terms of what how he perceives his signings. I think Sienats is a great example. Perhaps he was signed as a striker to replace Sargent eventually, but this is now the second manager who doesn't really know what to do with him. You have the whole Jurasek thing we've spoken about before. You've got a big fee spent on clearly a decent player, and another manager doesn't really know what to do with him. So who's to blame here? The manager, because they don't know what to do tactically? Or well, guess who he was hired by? Ben Knapper. Or is it Ben Knapper not knowing how to recruit for the style that he wants? That's the question that's got to be asked. And it's the caveat is, yeah, like someone like Harry Darling, great bit of business. And to be honest with you, Liam Manning probably had the pull for him, the promise that he was going to play for him again. But by the title of this video, bigger picture stuff, mate, that ain't going to quite do it for me. I don't know. Is there anything you want to say to that? You look like you're raring to go.
Yeah, I think the interesting point for me is where you speak about recruitment and you kind of look at that Liam Manning template from Bristol City. And as much as, I know a lot's been made about maybe him not playing with creative number sixes as much or players that can create from deep. They're, Knight and Bird, as much as they are top quality technical operators, they're not kind of your Nunez type profile in that sort of deeper line position that will almost sort of thread, I guess, the sort of defense to the attack. However, what I look at that team he had, and you look at like a Scott Twine who he's worked with previously at MK Dons and at Bristol City, that kind of more attacking number 10 who will create chances for the striker. And then you mentioned it. Norwich are currently operating with Antti Sienats in that position, who just is not a number 10. And that concern of where he should be playing. I mean, I felt last season what didn't help him was the fact that one week he was being expected to play in that number 9 role down the middle, then he was being shifted out wide, and almost Josh Sargent syndrome, I guess, from kind of that first season where he was playing second fiddle to Pookie, and it didn't help his development because it was confusing probably for a young player stepping into England for the first time and being told different things for different positions. And it's pretty clear that Liam Manning saw Sienats as a wide player, yet, we're now starting to see him almost be quite versatile again in that sort of attacking free behind Sargent. And yeah, the fact that they just don't know what he is or what position he is just really alarming. Because if you're recruiting for a system, you should almost have on a sort of whiteboard, I guess, players that play in every position. These are the 2 players for number 10. These are the 2 players for out wide. Almost, and you can have versatility within players, but you almost kind of want those frontline options in every position. And you look across the board, and yeah, they do feel like a group that's probably better wedded for other systems to what Liam Manning's currently playing, which yeah, is where all this confusion and kind of the muddle that I think they've got themselves into sort of stems from. Because Torrett predominantly at the early parts of last season played 4-3-3, and I kind of look at the squad they've got now, and it feels like that's probably a better suited system for the players they've currently got. Yet you've got Manning who's sort of between different systems, and we've seen that 3 at the back, and we've also seen 4 at the back and 4-2-3-1s, and we've seen everything really in and out of possession, different formations and sort of different ways of trying to build up and stuff. It's all just very confusing, which yeah almost begs the question of the recruitment team, I guess, to a degree, but Ben Knapper heading that up was because he knew Liam Manning was in the building and sort of the way he would want to play, and those conversations should be very open and it should have been very clear early on. So yeah, why you're then signing players that feel more aligned to maybe the previous manager, begs the questions of maybe why you didn't then maybe bring a different manager. If you felt Torrett didn't have the experience or wasn't learning, why not try and find somebody else who's kind of plays that same system but might be a better fit? Yeah, I've got, yeah, it's probably the first season in a while where I've just felt, as much as we've had difficult seasons, it just feels very confused, and that almost cross path between, I think previously the sort of path between Webber and Ben Knapper. Clearly there was, players within that group for a year or two that were Stuart Webber players. They were then had Ben Knapper players, and you had different managers who sort of had an oversight, I guess, of that dressing room. Now it should be a Ben Knapper team and an identity on the pitch that fits what he wants to see from a football team, with a manager in place who can provide that. And at the moment, you've got a group of players that are said to play this formation. You've got a manager who wants to play this formation, and you've got a sporting director who unfortunately feels in the middle of it and yeah, not really fitting either model, I guess, recruiting poorly and maybe not recruiting players that fit a certain manager.
Recording this, in my mind, almost felt like it was going to present the challenge of, because I wanted to talk about Ben Knapper. I wanted to criticize and to almost dissect his role and how we should look at him. And for me, it's been really easy. I wondered how we were going to get there, and I don't want that to sound horrible on like a personal level, but you know what I mean. So the points we make seem to just continuously find their ways back to Ben Knapper being a bit muddled and a bit confused. And I'm sure in his mind everything is very clear, and he wants to think he knows what he's doing. And as someone who doesn't work in football, there's only so much criticism we can give before reality hits, and you have to play by certain rules. And I, I don't know. It's just there's no getting away from this. Everything feels a little bit directionless, and the points we've made about the players that have been signed for, and I want to go on the record again of saying I'm a massive Thorpe apologist, and I didn't want him to be sacked. And at the moment, all I feel that is happening is that I'm being proved right. And I appreciate and I understand why people did want him sacked. And I respect the decision. I understand the decision because we can talk about projects, we can talk about performances, we can talk about um, anything we want. But if you lose the games in the manner to which he did at the end, you're up for the job. And that happened. But everything that has happened since, for Ben Knapper specifically, really does not bode well for his future. Um, we're probably at a point now where we can sit and almost just shrug and be like, over to you, mate. I don't think it'll be long if Norwich City continue on this path until actually we've got a pretty good case to sort of say, I don't think you're it, mate. I don't think you're our man to lead our football club. I really don't think we're very far from that. And football's a fickle game. We know how quickly fans can turn. As fans ourselves, we will have experienced the emotion, and we always will. But Napa won't be the last sporting director that we question. Liam Manning won't be the last Norwich City manager that we're a little bit unsure on, or in our case, quite unsure. But for the here and now, it's deeply concerning. I feel like we've made some pretty good points there. I want to wrap up with Stoke. What are your thoughts ahead of that? Because it almost feels as if what we want from this game is similar to the Wrexham game. It's just the context of the Wrexham game behind it massively heightens the element and the need for a better performance. Looking at Saturday as a game of football, for you, Adam, what do you want? What do you need from it?
Probably a 3 points and a performance that merits 3 points, because we've not really had that so far this season. I think Blackburn's maybe the only one you can make a case for. However, even within that game, they were facing a team in the second half with 10 men, yet sitting deep and soaking up pressure. And it didn't feel like an 11 versus 10 game. It felt like a game that Norwich are almost, on the back foot and having to defend for their lives again, which has kind of been a theme of this season. And it's not even really been because of positive defensive structures or performances. It's kind of been those late blocks and maybe things going their way, and Kovacevic putting some string of good saves together. So for me, they've got to go to Stoke, be positive, be on the front foot. Probably put in a performance over a longer sustained period, ideally 90 minutes, but certainly more than 20, 30-minute blocks. And that can't just come over one half. That has to come within both halves, because Stoke have proven it so far this season. I mean, 4 wins, 2 defeats in the first 6 games, second in the league. I know they've obviously lost 2 of their last 3 in the league, and maybe that sort of form's tailed off a little bit. However, they've got some good quality players within that core group. I think Sorba Thomas is a dangerous player. Mbama up front has started the season well. They've clearly got some experienced pros within the group as well who know the championship in and out, under a coach who notoriously has got a lot out of groups of players who maybe on paper aren't, you kind of glitzy, glamour, expensive players. They're just a group that almost have a structure, understand each other, have a set way of playing, and as a cohesive unit are very difficult to break down, but also, difficult to win against. And that's kind of Norwich's task, I guess, for Saturday, as much as that record over recent years has been quite positive against Stoke. I think they're unbeaten in the last 9 against them. I fear probably more for Saturday than I have any other time against them, because they look like a team that's trying to go places this season, which you'd hope Norwich would be in that similar position. But for all the reasons we've kind of outlined so far on this show, it's not quite been the case. So if Norwich go there, put in a performance and can utilise the quality they have in the ranks, then they should go there and get 3 points. However, unfortunately, I'm not feeling overly optimistic.
I echo that completely. And I have nothing to say about Stoke really, other than I'm really pleased for Mark Robbins. He's a championship manager. And I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I wish we had Mark Robbins leading our club, because I don't. I know he's a name that has been sort of spoken about in the past, fan wise, and I completely understand why, because the bloke is fantastic at what he does. He's a proper championship manager. He is someone that I can imagine is an absolute joy to play for. Although, again, if you get on his wrong side, I don't think I'd want to be there. And I'm really pleased that with Stoke, he's doing a good job for him. the way that job could have gone for him, because we've seen so many managers at Stoke recently, haven't we? In terms of the way their club has gone, almost it's almost how I'm feeling about how Norwich could go, where no matter who you bring in, it just goes wrong. And no matter how many players you sign, things continue to go wrong. The way Stoke were, sorry, Stoke fans, if you're watching, that's I'm scared that's going to happen to Norwich. That is what really worries me, because they were directionless for years. After Mark Hughes in the Premier League, that was it. I mean, they almost went down to League One, didn't they? And that is what I'm so fearful of. Is what I'm so fearful of. And Mark Robbins, as a bare minimum, sets his teams up to replicate what Manning described his teams as what they should be. So the integrity, the desire. It's that keyword desire, isn't it? Like as a bare minimum, you're gonna get 11 blokes just running at you with just juice flowing through them. Norwich City can't do that at the moment. Yeah, I'm terrified. I'm absolutely terrified. I'm trying to think that last defeat. Was that last defeat the one where Gary O'Neill tried to like cut someone Afellay in half, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the last defeat at the Bet365. They did lose that 1-0 to Stoke in the home game under Daniel Farker in the promotion season. I think it was a promotion season, 2018-19 one. Seemed to think that was sort of a bad patch around October where things had started to turn a little bit again, but obviously managed
Oh
to
my god,
pick
was
it
that a
back up.
closer own goal? Have I just plucked
I
that from
think
my
it might. I
brain?
think it might be. Yeah,
Wow, I remember that
it was quite
game.
early on. It was quite early on in the game.
Yeah,
Off memory.
yeah. Oh my god, wow, that's a sad trip down memory lane, because I'm now thinking about that season again. In conclusion, me and Adam are quite scared of Stoke away against a team who are going to give Norwich problems. Man, I pray that this time next week we're sat having a conversation where Norwich City actually stood up to the challenge. And to be honest with you, we could lose the game 2-1 or 3-2 or 1-0. And how low I feel about Norwich at the moment is that I'm almost not that fussed about the result. I just want to see a team give something. I just want to see a reason to be a little bit hopeful. I would rather see us almost, I know this is going to boil some wee wee somewhere, but I would rather see us lose 1-0 or 2-1 with Josh Sargent having an XG of 5 and having an absolute mare, rather than have another Coventry away and pick up a point. I would much rather see that. I would much rather we be sat here with our hands on our head talking about, oh, how did he not score that, how did he not score that, oh, wasn't the link up play good, don't the midfield look sort of galvanized. And I really hope that's the conversation we have alongside 3 points. But I'm at a point now where we need to see just the just something like a carrot on a stick being dangled in front of us. We need a reason to be hopeful. Um, but yeah, Adam, your final thoughts? Anything you want to add? I feel like we've done a pretty good job of summing up Norwich.
I think so. Yeah, I think as you sort of said there, and as I outlined previously, for me, Saturday's a huge game. It's one of them where it's not going to be easy against a team that's got the joint best defensive record so far in the championship. And for all the reasons you outlined for Mark Robbins as a championship manager, he's difficult to play against. And I know Norwich have had joy against his teams in recent times, but I don't know what's going on there on my phone. But yeah, it's been not the easiest, I guess, for them to. I've completely lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I think it's been a team and a manager, I guess they've had some success against. So they've almost got to try and harness, I guess, that positively on Saturday. However, yeah, I think it's tough to feel optimistic, which, yeah, it's not a great position to be in so early on in the season. But they almost need that positive result to then bounce into the West Brom home game feeling a little bit more confident, I guess, of trying to get something and almost, I suppose, eradicating that Carrow Road hoodoo that they've got at the moment. And then going into the Derby day, which I know we'll preview next week, and I'm absolutely dreading for all the reasons that we've spoke about in depth. So yeah, that's kind of my closing thoughts, I guess, is that, yeah, for everything we've said so far, it's concerning.
All I'll say is I'm sure your train of thought would have been a lot easier to come back to if we had something positive to say. I feel like if there was something to hang on to, your brain might have gone, "Oh, this is fun," but no, that is very much not the case. The last thing I want to say, thank you to everyone who's watched the videos so far and the support we've been given. We've hit 100 subscribers. Way celebration to us. So if you have enjoyed the content so far, please thumbs up, subscribe, all that good stuff. My fingers are firmly crossed for 3 points on Saturday, and we'll see you in the next one.